Well, welcome once again, my neighbors and friends here to our mountain, to Monticello. What a pleasure it is to greet you with today's subject, architecture. Now, I had hoped that I would be able to greet you outdoors to better explain and exemplify my essay in architecture, but unfortunately, the inclemency must welcome us with indoors. So I brought my stick and my string with me. Now, some of the gentlemen who are with us today will understand that as a foundation of providing the architecture throughout the history of mankind. It is with respect to an isosceles triangle and the squares on each side equaling the square of the hypotenuse. So this, if you will, can be also exemplified with indoors. So I'm happy we may meet here in the salle de manger, that's French for the dining chamber. This is one of the original rooms of my design of Monticello. And beautifully appointed, if you will, with, curious elements of architecture not well known throughout our young nation. In fact, I would like to point out the Tuscan arch here, beautifully designed upon ancient principles of architecture. It divides the dining room proper from the tea room, and there with louvered doors, doubled, if you will, on each side, closing them in the wintertime preserves the warmth within this room. Also, the dumbwaiter, and I refer to the permanent dumbwaiter that is built within the fireplace. I say permanent because there's a portable dumbwaiter of shelving that holds plates. I saw both of these in France and thought that I would utilize the permanent dumbwaiter in the fireplace to bring wine up from the cellar. And then finally, the skylight here in the dining room. That is one of 13 skylights that I have built here in Monticello. And can you imagine the sublime scene here in full moonlight with candlelight upon the table? So I welcome your gathering here, particularly once more welcoming Mr. Brandon Dillon to be our moderator. And without any further comment from me, before I receive your questions, I should then like to take a chair, if you will allow me. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Dillon, your first question to welcome us here in our discussion on architecture.
How did you first become interested in architecture, Mr. Jefferson?
How did I first become interested in the subject of architecture? I dare say one cannot be born in the forest primeval, here, out in the beauty, the sublime beauty of nature, without an appreciation of nature's architecture. All of that put into its effect by the great architect of this universe. It is the sublime beauty of proportion, a sense of intimacy, let alone of noble grandeur. Now, I was and ennobling architect. Now, I can tell you, as I grew older and had the opportunity to go to Williamsburg for my education, but I could not help but pass by the magnificent mansion houses of Shirley, that built by the Hill Carter family. Berkeley, that built by the Harrison family. and Westover plantations. These were built out of brick. And what fascinated me was the delicate delineation of a building built in brick that could not be achieved in one built of wood. No, I'd say happily, wooden structures only last about 70 years before they fall down and you have to build again. But brick is more permanent. And then, of course, in Williamsburg, I had the opportunity to see the fine Capitol building there. A light and airy structure, and as well the governor's palace, though I thought that rather heavy and far too commodious within. But these were early influences that helped to more or less prepare me for my future, the life in architecture. Your next question, Mr. Dillon.
Jeff wants to know if there's anything you would change about your house.
I beg your pardon, I did not hear that clearly.
Jeff wants to know if there's anything you would change about your house.
Anything that has changed about my house?
That
That I would like to change with my house. But Jeff, I will tell you, I'm afraid that I enjoy too much building things up and then pulling them down to ever be finished a project in architecture. So yes, there is much that I would like to continue to alter and to improve upon. What I have hoped to achieve in my renovations already here at Monticello is not only a more ennobling sense of wanting to live within the structure, but also that ennobling sense while maintaining a sense of intimacy. Remember, I was born in a very small farmhouse, and that intimacy of the family bond is something that I have made an effort to preserve as I continue to evolve my design here at Monticello. What I would change now, perhaps, is, more connections, if you will, to those on the outside and their greater comfort of habitation. And maybe extend, if you will, the terraced walkways, that to the north and that to the south. The next question.
Were there certain books about architecture that inspired you?
Were there certain books that inspired me in the art of architecture? Well, yes. When I was a young man and mentioned that I was attending the Overall College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, there was a bookstore right across the street. I remember acquiring my first book in architecture. It was James Gibbs' book in architecture. I believe it was first published in London in 1728. Oh, they were beautiful buildings, most ennobling in their design. I then acquired Robert Morris's books on architecture. His first book, published about the same year, 1728, Defending Ancient Architecture. Defending, if you will, the ancient principles of architecture that could still be useful here in the modern world, that we might continue to build accordingly. And then I purchased his select book on architecture, in which he had personally selected certain ancient buildings that might be improved upon by methods of modern architecture. That was published about 1750. But I will tell you now, of all the books on architecture, the 4 books of Andrea Palladio, a 16th century Italian architect, remain my favorite. I purchased from that store Leone's English edition of the Palladian books on architecture, and they have remained my Bible. Now, I do not want to neglect the Builder's Dictionary, otherwise known as the Gentleman's Companion, because that is something that helps you to know how to build accordingly, particularly in efficient designs of ancient architecture. The next question.
Jillian from Vienna wants to know if you have a favorite piece of architecture.
You want to know if I have a favorite piece of architecture? Well, I will tell you this. In nature, my favorite piece of architecture remains the Natural Bridge in Rockbridge County, Virginia. And happily, I own it. I discovered that the patent for it was still available, about 150 acres, when I was a young man in Williamsburg. No one had chosen to purchase it because you simply cannot farm it. But I have had no interest to farm it. I built a small cabin there by Rock Creek, and I sit on the front porch and ponder how this must have been built by the great architect of our universe. Now, I've never been able to see the great falls at Niagara, but I have likenesses of it, if you will, upon my walls here, and I consider that one of my favorite pieces of natural architecture. Now then, of ancient architecture, where do I begin? Might it be the ancient arch at Orange? Might it be the theater there? Might it be the Colosseum in Arles? I would say that what remains my favorite piece is the Maison Carrée, that Roman temple. Now, I had already seen it in books of ancient buildings still standing. In fact, Charles Louis Clarisseau's buildings of ancient Rome. But to see a building rendered in a book is not like seeing it in nature. And I'll never forget when I journeyed to Nimes in the south of France and saw the Maison Carrée for the very first time. I gazed upon it like a lover upon his mistress. Yes, to the extent that the stocking weavers and silk spinners thought me a hypochondriac Englishman ready to end my life with a pistol. Happily, the Maison Carrée has served as the prototype for our Capitol building in Richmond, Virginia, a true temple of justice. The next question.
As you grew older, did your tastes in architecture change? Did your time in Europe influence you?
Oh, I will tell you, without a question, the 5 years I spent in La Belle, France had a definitive influence upon my taste in architecture. You see, I had always considered that the genius of architecture had shed its malediction upon the land here in Virginia. I wanted to improve the tastes of our countrymen. I happened to arrive in France at the time when they were dismantling and demolishing many of the old medieval buildings, particularly in the city of Paris. They were building anew with a sense of modern architecture, but dedicated to ancient principles. It was truly a city of light. And they were mining, if you will, the limestone beneath Paris to build these beautiful buildings. I was struck with the Hotel Curlion, the Hotel de la Marine, the facades that had provided by Jacques Gabriel. I was very smitten with one particular townhouse in Paris, built by a very wealthy German prince, Peter Hilbert de Saint. It was known as the Hotel de Saint. They referred to townhouses in Paris as hotels. And I would walk down the Champs-Élysées into the Tuileries Gardens. I would perch myself on the balustrade, look across the Seine there at the building of the Hotel de Saint, and was so taken with watching several stories hidden by a one-story facade and then atop the building of a dome. Now, it's one thing to see a dome in a book, to try and understand its construction. But to be able to look upon it with the naked eye and see how it is placed in nature, well, I can only say this. My renovation of Monticello takes its reference in the Hotel de Saint. Many people tell me that the Hotel de Saint is still there in Paris. It is known as the Musée de Légion de l'Honneur. They tell me, oh, Mr. Jefferson, we look to the left bank across the Seine from the Tuileries Gardens, and there's this beautiful white marble Monticello. I say, no, no, no. Please, if you will, consider Monticello a beautiful red brick Hotel de Saint. Your next question.
Looks like a couple young folks, Fenton and Lincoln, want to know if your time at Tuckahoe influenced the design or furnishings at Monticello.
Well, gentlemen, you want to know if my experience at Tuckahoe for the 7 years my family was living there had any influence in the furnishings here at Monticello. I would not say so directly in the furnishings at Monticello as it had at Shadwell House, where I was born and grew up. Because once my father removed our family back to Shadwell House, he set about to double the size of Shadwell Farmhouse. And yes, to bring into the household many fine pieces of furniture. Now, I do still have some of those pieces of furniture, but as far as the design of Monticello and the furnishings herein, they are essentially of a French design that ever remains my favorite. Next question.
What was your first project in architecture?
My first project in architecture was my hermitage. No matter where I travel, I have always sought a place where I can get away, where I can simply read and write, but most importantly, where I may think. So you can imagine, with all the cares for managing Shadwell Farm, particularly when my father passed away in 1757, I was only 14, and I was one of 10 children. I had 3 brothers and I had 6 sisters. Well, fortunately, you could not walk out the front door of Shadwell House without seeing the little mountain in the distance. It beckoned me as a young boy. And so I'd spend an entire day hiking up Monticello, usually in the company of my friend Dabney Carr. And it was here, as a young boy, that I decided I would build a retreat, a hermitage. I leveled the top of the mountain off in 1768. And then the next year, I built a brick cottage, somewhat like a castle keep, overlooking, if you will, the southeast, what I still refer to as my ocean view. Just one room. It was my bedchamber, kitchen, hall, study, cabinet as well. I had below it, if you will, another room, I will not deny, and that continued to serve in many ways as a kitchen, where I built stew pots, which I had first seen in Paris. But when I married in 1772, I brought my bride to my hermitage, and it then became our honeymoon cottage. That is where we began our family, and that is where I began to design the first Monticello. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, standing here in the dining room is one of the first rooms, one of the original rooms of my first design of Monticello. The next question.
Were there other projects that you pursued when you were younger?
Were there other projects that I pursued when I was younger? Well, yes. In fact, I will tell you, when I was elected the second governor of the new Commonwealth of Virginia, I set about to design, or say redesign, the old Capitol building in Williamsburg, let alone what was known as the Governor's Palace. Now, I thought both of them were a bit too commodious, particularly the palace. And I felt there was too grand a staircase in the Governor's Palace. We do not need grand staircases. I ask you this, do you live on a staircase? Well, then consider how much room it takes up and how you can use that area as more intimate living space. That is why here at Monticello, I have very narrow staircases. And of course, they do not allow a great deal of heat to escape into the above stairs during the summer. That's nearly unbearable. And the old Capitol building in Williamsburg, I thought, ought to be redesigned more as a temple of justice. I mentioned that earlier in my delight in the Maison Carrée, which has become the model for our Capitol building here in Virginia. So those were 2 other projects that I sought to accomplish when I was young. Now, I should not deny that the first design of Monticello was commenced when I was 26 years old. So that is certainly the most prominent project of my youth. The first design, it only had 8 rooms. And now, of course, there are 43 rooms. Oh, yes, 43 rooms here at Monticello. In the main house itself, there are 33. That is right. 12 rooms in the cellar, 11 rooms on the first floor. There's 6 rooms on the second floor and 4 rooms on the third floor. I have 2 pavilions, and they have 2 rooms each. And then, of course, on the South Terrace walkway, there are about 6 rooms there. Your next question.
Brian wants to know if you had influence in Washington, D.C., buildings there.
Oh, Brian, you're asking me, did I have influence in the public buildings there designed in our nation's capital city? Well, I was head of the Builders Commission, head of the Design Commission for Washington City. So you can imagine I did have some influence. Now then, as the chairman of that commission, I could not submit my own drawings. However, that did not keep me from designing what I thought would be proper for the design of a president's house, a proper design for a Capitol building. And so, if you will, I came up with those designs, the one for the president's house, almost a replica of the Villa Rotunda. I never was able to see that Villa Rotunda in Vicenza, but oh, it is such a beautiful building on paper. What does it look like to see it with the naked eye as it's placed in nature? Now, I could not write my own name on the drawing, Thomas Jefferson, so I simply wrote the symbols for Alpha and Omega. Needless to say, my designs were not chosen by the committee, even though I was chairman. The next question.
We hear you once said, "Architecture is my delight, and putting up and pulling down one of my favorite amusements." What do you mean by that?
So you've heard, as I have said and I have written, that architecture is one of my greatest delights, that I enjoy, as I said earlier, to build up and then to pull down. What I mean by that is simply man is never finished in providing more intriguing, more comfortable, more intimate, and ennobling methods of sheltering himself from the elements of nature. I mentioned earlier my great love of the architecture of nature itself. It is nonetheless a man's effort to build buildings that invite him to inhabit those buildings. Buildings that can help him live the healthier. That is what I have discovered in rooms that have high ceilings. They welcome a greater animation of air. And are you not happier when you walk into a room that has many windows and a great degree of light? And then, as I have mentioned all along, the principles of architecture established by the ancients are still as relevant and necessary today to lift our sentiments to a noble height of what man can accomplish, particularly on behalf of his fellow man. No, this is why I'm never finished a project, why I'm continually thinking and pursuing, if you will, by a stick and a string, more delicate and more relevant and utilitarian designs in architecture. It is an element of science, is it not? And science is never complete. That's why I believe that science and man are on a continual advance, and the fine art of architecture and the mathematics required for it will continue to walk hand in hand. Your next question.
So you've designed many buildings over the years, but who actually constructed these buildings?
Oh, you asked me, as I've designed many buildings, who has actually constructed them. Is it not a curious contradiction to realize that all that we enjoy inside has been built by those on the outside? I mean that, of course, with a deference and respect to the enslaved who have built all that you see. In my very first design, an artisan, a craftsman by the name of Nielsen, Joseph Nielsen, came here to help join and as carpenter the building of the first Monticello. Well, he could not have achieved that without the assistance of William Fawcett, one of my enslaved here. And then later in the remodeling of Monticello, to double the size as I referred to earlier, to liken it unto the Hotel de Somme. Well, the Irish joiner, the immigrant by the name of James Dinsmore, came and lived here for nearly 10 years. And his fine craftsmanship in joining could not have been accomplished without the support of John Hemmings. John Hemmings was the son of Betty Hemmings, and it is believed the son of Joseph Nielsen. And so it is John Hemmings and Mr. Dinsmore worked together very closely. And as you saw me refer to the Tuscan arch now behind me, do you know that the one in my suite of rooms on the southeast side of Monticello, that Tuscan arch was built in 12 days with John Hemmings and James Dinsmore working together. In my estimation, they are the finest joiners to be found anywhere. No, this could not have been done without the enslaved. Your next question.
Was Monticello the only private house you designed? Logan wants to know if you influenced any of your friends' houses.
Logan, you want to know if Monticello is the only house that I have designed? Did I influence friends of mine in their own houses? Well, yes. Happily, I provided designs for my neighbor, Mr. Divers, George Divers, at Farmington, just a short way from here. I'm rather proud of his renovation there. And I cannot neglect Governor Barber's. Governor Barber's house, Barbersville, is one of my designs as well. In fact, I have included in the very center of the Barbersville Mansion House an octagon room and also indoor privies. Now, I want to say that's quite the innovation, indoor privies. I grew up, of course, you had to go out to outhouses. But Governor Barber has been very pleased with his indoor privies. I'm most comfortable. I have 5 privies here at Monticello, 3 with indoors. And do you know, when I was elected president of our nation, took up my habitation in the president's house, well, there were outdoor necessaries. And so, if you will, I had them demolished and built 2 indoor privies in the president's house. So if the Federalist, I want to say I never accomplished anything during my 2 administrations, I think that was a welcome accomplishment. Now, I do not want to deny that I was of influence in General Cox's mansion house known as Bremo, and please, I do not want to forget my retreat house, Poplar Forest, a 3-day ride from here in Bedford County. That is where I go to retreat. It's still rather a hermitage, and it is my design in a perfect octagon. I have windows in each of the 8 sides, and so therefore there's no dark corner. It is very much an architectural souffle, rising very lightly and delicately. And now as I realize I am speaking about it, well, it's no longer as private as I had planned it to be. So there, if you will, are some of the buildings that I have succeeded to submit designs and to be of influence to build for others, let alone continually for myself. And I hope you all will have the opportunity to visit these places, as I hope you will return here as well to Monticello. Your next question.
Are you working on any architectural projects at the moment?
Am I working on any architectural projects at present? Yes. Need I say, our university. The University of Virginia. That is the project of my autumn years. That occupies me nearly every single day. It is unique. There is not another university or college, to my knowledge, upon the globe that is of the particular design of the University of Virginia. In fact, I will tell you that the prototype for my design of the University of Virginia, an academical village that is with 10 pavilions, they are opposite one and the other with a lawn in betwixt, and then the library or the rotunda at the far end. Well, that comes from the design of the Chateau de Marly. The Chateau de Marly was a pleasure ground of fountains surrounded with pavilions and the chateau itself in the center. I was introduced to it by the Causeways, Richard and Maria Causeway. It's but a few miles removed from Versailles. It sits down in a valley, and I'll never forget alighting from the carriage and looking down into the valley. There you saw these pavilions opposite, one from the other, like a sea, and then the chateau in the center at far end of that sea, and in front of the pavilions were fountains. The fountains were animated by water cascading down the mountain at the open end of the grounds of the chateau. The cascade of water was provided by a reservoir on top of the mountain. And that water in the reservoir was from the Seine. It was pumped up from the Seine River on the opposite side, and by natural gravity, it flowed into that pleasure garden. There it hit me. The font of knowledge. And so there you have the influence for our academical village. Your next question.
So one last two-part question. Do you think that the study of architecture should be a necessary subject in education? And do you think your designs in architecture will be appreciated in the future?
So for our last question, it is two-part. Do I think that the study of architecture is necessary and must be continued? And do I think what I have already designed might be looked upon in the future, which is with as much appreciation as I have for it now? Well, firstly, let me say that what I may be interested in now, what I have designed myself now, is my delight at present. We have discussed how I felt about architecture from the time of my youth, how my interest in it has evolved, how I continue to build things up and tear things down. Well, that thereby means that I should not expect that what I have designed now may receive the same approbation in the future. And yet, there may be particular principles of the architecture I have employed that will continue to be appreciated because they are the principles that I have found in ancient architecture. And many of these buildings still survive, particularly throughout the south of France that I have been able to see. They have survived the centuries because they have received the approbation of the centuries. So I cannot say more than that about how the future will judge my own designs. But you asked, do I believe the study of architecture is necessary? And without a question, I answer yes. Consider this. We double our population every 25 years or so. What other art could be the most useful, the most necessary than the art of sheltering ourselves? I said this earlier. Not only sheltering ourselves from nature, but providing the opportunity to lift our sentiments, lift our spirits to an appreciation of art, to lift our tastes, if you will, to ennoble ourselves in recognition of the finer elements of human nature, to realize we share this with the family of man across the globe. That is the mark of a civilized people. People who build not only to shelter themselves from the elements, but who build to preserve their health and to preserve their happiness. I thank you for this opportunity that we could meet again here at our house of Monticello. I will now go out of doors with my string and my stick. I'm imagining what it might be like to build an observation tower atop Mount Alto there. Now that's the tall mountain, Mount Alto. I live here on the small mountain, Monticello. So I hope you will return soon, see how far I've gotten here in my design. And rest you assured as I take leave, I ever remain your humble and obedient servant, Thomas Jefferson. Godspeed.